the frozen mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through every shadow and hope dies with the setting sun, one woman made a choice that would echo through eternity. When her radio crackled to life with desperate pleas for help, when her team lay bleeding in the snow, when the enemy closed in like hungry wolves, she pressed her lips to the microphone. One last time. Her voice was steady, calm, almost peaceful, as she spoke words that would haunt those who heard them forever. Save them without me. This is not a story about war. This is not a story about heroism. This is the story of Elena Rodriguez, a ghost who walked among the living. A sniper who could kill from a mile away, but couldn't kill the demons in her own heart. It's the story of a woman who faced the darkest night of her life completely alone, and in doing so, became a legend that would inspire generations. Some stories are told to entertain, some are told to teach. This story is told because it must be told, because the truth has a way of demanding to be heard, even when it breaks our hearts to listen. Elena Rodriguez never wanted to be a soldier. Growing up in the dusty streets of El Paso, Texas, she dreamed of becoming a teacher, of shaping young minds and making a difference in her community. Her grandmother would sit on the porch every evening, telling stories of their ancestors who crossed the border with nothing but hope and determination. Elena would listen with wide eyes, imagining herself in a classroom full of children, their faces bright with curiosity and possibility. But life has a way of changing even the most carefully laid plans. When Elena was 17, her father lost his job at the factory. Medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment piled up like autumn leaves, each one carrying the weight of desperation. The military recruiter who visited her high school that spring spoke of opportunities, of education benefits, of a chance to serve something greater than herself. Elena signed the papers 3 days after graduation, her mother's frail hand squeezing hers as she made the promise that would change everything. Basic training at Fort Benning was nothing like the movies. Elena discovered muscles she never knew she had, found strength buried deep in places she'd never explored. While other recruits complained about the early mornings and endless push-ups, Elena embraced the challenge. She was small, barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, but what she lacked in size she made up for in determination. Her instructors noticed something special about her during weapons training. Her hands were steady as stone, her breathing controlled and natural. When she looked through the scope of a rifle, the world seemed to slow down around her. Sergeant Martinez, a weathered veteran with kind eyes and calloused hands, pulled Elena aside after a particularly impressive performance on the shooting range. She had hit targets at distances that made seasoned marksmen shake their heads in wonder. He looked at her for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to read the future written there.
"Rodriguez," he said quietly, "have you ever thought about sniper school?"
Elena had never considered it. The word sniper conjured images of faceless killers hiding in shadows, taking lives from impossible distances.
Ooh. That wasn't who she wanted to be. She wanted to help people, not hurt them. But Sergeant Martinez explained it differently. He told her about protection, about saving lives by taking difficult shots that others couldn't make. He spoke of precision over destruction, of surgical strikes that could prevent larger battles. Sometimes, he said, watching a hawk circle overhead, one person with the right skills can save dozens of lives. It's not about killing, Elena. It's about protection. It's about being the guardian angel that no one ever sees. The words stayed with her for weeks.
Elena called her mother that night, sitting in the quiet corner of the barracks, as other recruits played cards and shared stories from home. Her mother's voice was weaker than before, but still carried that gentle strength that Elena had always admired.
Mija, her mother said softly, I raised you to follow your heart, but also to use your head. If God gave you a gift, maybe it's because he knows the world needs it. Sniper school was 13 weeks of hell disguised as training. Only 1 in 4 candidates completed the program. Elena found herself among men who had been soldiers for years, who looked at her with skepticism and doubt. They whispered about her size, her age, her gender. She let them talk. While they wasted energy on words, Elena focused on breathing, on calculating wind speed and bullet drop, on becoming invisible in plain sight. The instructors pushed every candidate to their breaking point and beyond. They taught camouflage techniques that turned human beings into part of the landscape, patience that could stretch across hours and days, and most importantly, the mental discipline required to take a life when necessary. Elena struggled with the philosophical aspects of the training. Each night she would lie in her bunk staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was becoming someone her grandmother would recognize. Her first field exercise took place in the swamps of Louisiana. Elena and her spotter, a quiet young man named David Kim, were given coordinates for a simulated hostage situation. They had to move through miles of mosquito-infested wetlands, establish a hide, and wait for the perfect shot. Elena spent 18 hours in position, her body cramped and aching, insects crawling across her face as she remained perfectly still. When the moment came when the instructor playing the role of terrorist appeared in her scope, Elena's finger hesitated on the trigger. In that split second, she saw not a target but a human being, someone with a family, with dreams, with fears. The hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough. She missed the shot by inches. That night, Instructor Williams, a grizzled veteran with scars covering his arms, sat down next to Elena as she cleaned her rifle. He didn't say anything for a long time, just watched her work with the methodical precision she had developed. "You're thinking too much," he finally said. "In the field, when lives are on the line, there's no time for philosophy. You either take the shot or people die. Good people. Your people." Elena looked up from her weapon, her dark eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights of the armory. "How do you live with it? The knowing that you've taken someone's life?" Williams was quiet for a moment, his weathered hands folding together. "You live with it by remembering who you saved. Every terrorist you stop, every hostage you protect, every soldier who comes home because you did your job. The weight never goes away, but it gets balanced by the lives you preserve." From that moment forward, Elena's perspective began to shift. She started to understand that her role wasn't about taking lives, it was about protecting them. She thought about her mother fighting cancer, about her grandmother, who had fled violence to give her family a better future, about all the innocent people in the world who needed someone to stand between them and those who would do them harm. Her second field exercise went differently. This time, when the moment came, Elena's breathing was steady, her mind clear. The simulated shot was perfect, striking the target's center mass from 800 yards away. She felt no joy in the success, but she felt peace. She was beginning to understand her purpose. Graduation day arrived with little fanfare. Of the 40 candidates who had started the program, only 11 remained. Elena stood in formation, her sniper badge catching the morning sunlight as it was pinned to her uniform. Her parents had driven from El Paso to watch the ceremony, her mother weak but smiling. Her father's chest swelled with pride he couldn't quite hide. After the ceremony, Elena's mother pulled her aside. The older woman's face was gaunt from chemotherapy, but her eyes still sparkled with the fierce love that had shaped Elena's childhood. "I'm proud of you, mija," she whispered, her hands cupping Elena's face. "But promise me something. Promise me you'll remember who you are, no matter what happens over there. You're not a killer, you're a protector. This is vision. Don't let the war change that." Elena's first deployment came 6 months later. Afghanistan in winter was like stepping into another world, a landscape of impossible beauty and hidden danger. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, their peaks crowned with snow that glittered like diamonds in the thin air. But beneath the beauty lay a complexity that no amount of training could have prepared her for. Her unit was stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman, a collection of concrete barriers and prefabricated buildings carved into a valley floor. The base housed 200 soldiers, support staff, and intelligence personnel. Elena quickly earned a reputation for her skills and her quiet professionalism. While other soldiers gathered in the recreation tent to play video games or write letters home, Elena spent her free time on the observation deck, studying the surrounding terrain through her scope. She memorized every ridge, every valley, every potential hiding spot within a 5-mile radius. Her spotter, Corporal J. Thompson, was a farm boy from Iowa, with an easy smile and an uncanny ability to read wind patterns. They developed the kind of partnership that only comes from shared danger and mutual trust. "You see everything, don't you?" Jake asked one evening as they watched the sunset behind the mountains. They had just completed their third successful mission, neutralizing an insurgent weapons cache from a distance of nearly a mile. Elena adjusted her scope, tracking a bird as it soared between the peaks. "My grandmother used to say that God gave us eyes not just to see what's in front of us, but to see what's coming. In this place, seeing everything might be the difference between going home and not going home." Their first real combat mission came on a Tuesday morning in February. Intelligence had identified a Taliban commander who was planning an attack on a nearby village. The man had a history of using civilians as human shields, making a direct assault impossible. Elena and Jake were inserted under cover of darkness, hiking 3 miles through terrain that would have challenged mountain goats. They established their hide in a cluster of rocks overlooking the target building. Elena's job was simple in concept, impossibly difficult in execution. Wait for the target to appear,
identify him among potentially dozens of people, and take a clean shot without harming innocent bystanders.
The margin for error was 0. They waited for 7 hours. Elena lay motionless behind her rifle, her eye pressed to the scope, watching the building below like a hawk watches a field mouse. Jake lay beside her, using his spotting scope to read wind conditions and help identify targets. They communicated in whispers and hand signals, their partnership honed by hours of training and shared purpose. When the target finally appeared, Elena's heart rate didn't increase by even a single beat per minute. Through her scope, she could see the man's face clearly, could see the automatic weapon in his hands, could see the way he gestured to his followers with casual authority. According to intelligence reports, this man was responsible for the deaths of dozens of civilians, including children.
Wind is calm, Jake whispered. Range is 640 meters.
Target is confirmed. Elena's breathing slowed to the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. Inhale, exhale, natural pause, squeeze. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar force, the sound echoing off the surrounding mountains like distant thunder. Through her scope, Elena watched the target fall, clean hit, center mass, instant incapacitation. Around him, his followers scattered in confusion and panic. Within minutes, they had melted away into the maze of mountain paths and hidden caves that characterized the region. Target down, Elena reported into her radio, her voice steady and professional. Mission accomplished. But as they packed their equipment and prepared to move to the extraction point, Elena felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or pride, but a profound sadness. She had just taken her first human life, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The man in her scope had been a terrorist, a killer of innocence, someone who deserved whatever justice found him.
But he had also been someone's son, perhaps someone's father, a human being whose story had now ended by her hand. That night, back at the base, Elena sat alone in the communications tent, staring at a blank piece of paper.
She wanted to write to her mother, to her grandmother, to someone who might understand the weight that had settled on her shoulders. But how could she explain that she had become someone she never intended to be?
How could she describe the way it felt to hold life and death in her hands? Instead, she wrote nothing. She folded the blank paper carefully and placed it in her footlocker next to the other letters she had never sent. Some truths were too heavy to share, some burdens too personal to communicate. Over the following months, Elena's reputation grew. Other soldiers began calling her Ghost for her ability to appear and disappear without detection, to strike from impossible distances and vanish before anyone could locate her position. The nickname felt appropriate. She was beginning to feel like a ghost herself, moving through the world but not quite part of it, watching life through the lens of a rifle scope. Her missions became more frequent and more dangerous. She neutralized weapons smugglers, eliminated high-value targets, provided overwatch for convoy operations and village patrols. Each mission was a success. Each mission saved lives. Each mission added another weight to the invisible burden she carried. Jake noticed the changes before anyone else. Elena's easy smile appeared less frequently. Her conversations became shorter, more focused on practical matters. She spent more time alone, studying maps and intelligence reports, preparing for missions, with an intensity that worried her friends. "You need to talk to someone," Jake said one evening as they cleaned their weapons.
The chaplain, the psychologist, hell, even me. But you can't keep all this inside. Elena looked up from her rifle, her dark eyes reflecting a weariness that seemed older than her 22 years. What would I say? That I'm good at my job? That I sleep fine at night? That I don't see their faces when I close my eyes? Do you? Jake asked quietly. See their faces? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hands moving automatically through the familiar ritual of weapon maintenance. Every single one, she finally admitted.
But I also see the faces of the people I've saved. The convoy that made it through the pass, because I eliminated the ambush. The village that slept safely because I took out the weapons cache. The patrol that came home because I provided overwatch. I see them too. It was the most she had said about her experiences in months, and Jake recognized the trust she was placing in him by sharing even that much. They finished cleaning their weapons in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts too complex for words. Elena's transformation from reluctant soldier to elite sniper was complete, but the cost was becoming apparent to those who knew her best. She had become exactly what her instructors had trained her to be, a professional, efficient, deadly guardian angel. But in becoming a ghost who protected others, she had lost something essential of herself. The woman who had dreamed of teaching children now taught lessons in survival and precision to fellow soldiers. The young girl who had listened to her grandmother's stories of hope and determination now created stories that would be whispered in barracks and briefing rooms for years to come.
Elena Rodriguez had become exactly what the world needed her to be. But she was no longer sure who Elena Rodriguez was beneath the legend of the ghost. As winter deepened in the Afghan mountains, Elena began to sense that something was building, some storm approaching that would test everything she had learned, everything she had become. The intelligence report spoke of increased enemy activity, of a major operation being planned by Taliban forces in the region. Her commanders were requesting more frequent patrols, more dangerous missions, more risks taken in the name of protecting innocent lives. Elena welcomed the challenge.
Action was easier than reflection, purpose clearer than philosophy.
Whatever was coming, she would face it as she had faced everything else, with precision, with professionalism, and with the quiet determination that had carried her from the streets of El Paso to the mountains of Afghanistan. She had no way of knowing that the greatest test of her life was still ahead, that soon she would face a choice between saving her team and saving herself, between being the ghost who protected others and being the woman who wanted to come home.
The mountains held their secrets close, and winter was far from over. The mission briefing that would change Elena's life forever took place on a Thursday morning in March, when the Afghan winter was finally loosening its grip on the mountains.
Snow still crowned the highest peaks, but the valleys had begun to show patches of brown earth, and the air carried hints of the spring that was struggling to emerge. Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood at the front of the briefing room, her silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her weathered face bearing the marks of 20 years in combat zones.
Behind her, a large screen displayed satellite images of a remote valley 30 miles northeast of their base. The images showed a collection of buildings clustered around what appeared to be a small village, but intelligence reports painted a different picture.
Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Mitchell began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned her rank through competence rather than politics. We have a situation that requires immediate action. This location, designated Target Bravo, is believed to be the operational headquarters for Khalil Ahmadi, the Taliban commander responsible for the attacks on our supply convoys over the past 6 months.
Elena studied the satellite images with professional interest. The village was positioned in a natural bottleneck between two mountain ranges, with only one apparent access road.
Tactically, it was both a fortress and a trap, easily defended but with limited escape routes. Her experienced eye immediately began identifying potential sniper positions, fields of fire, and approach routes.
Colonel Mitchell continued, clicking through additional images that showed the compound in greater detail. Intelligence indicates that Ahmadi is planning a major offensive against civilian targets in Kabul.
We believe he's using this location to coordinate with other terrorist cells and store weapons for the operation. Our mission is to capture or eliminate Ahmadi and neutralize the threat.
The plan, as outlined by Colonel Mitchell and her intelligence officers, was deceptively straightforward. A 12-person special operations team would approach the target under cover of darkness, using the terrain to mask their movement.
Elena and Jake would establish an overwatch position on a ridge overlooking the compound, providing sniper support and reconnaissance for the ground team. The timeline is critical, Colonel Mitchell emphasized, her pale blue eyes scanning the faces of the assembled soldiers.
Intelligence suggests Ahmadi will be moving to a new location within 48 hours. This may be our only opportunity to stop whatever he's planning. Elena raised her hand, her mind already working through the tactical challenges. Ma'am, what's our exfiltration plan? That valley is a natural kill zone if things go wrong.
Colonel Mitchell nodded approvingly at the question. Good point, Sergeant Rodriguez. We'll have 2 Black Hawk helicopters standing by at a forward refueling point.
If the mission goes as planned, extraction will be at a landing zone 2 clicks south of the target. If things go sideways, we have backup extraction points here and here.
She indicated positions on the map with a laser pointer.
The briefing continued for another hour, covering communications protocols, rules of engagement, contingency plans, and the myriad details that could mean the difference between success and disaster. Elena absorbed every piece of information, filing it away in the mental database she had developed over months of combat operations.
After the briefing, Elena and Jake spent the rest of the day preparing their equipment with meticulous care. Elena's rifle, a customized M24 sniper weapon system, was broken down, cleaned, and reassembled twice. She checked and double-checked her scope alignment, tested her rangefinder, and verified that every piece of equipment was functioning perfectly. Jake worked beside her, preparing his spotting scope and communication equipment.
They had developed a ritual over their months of partnership, a methodical process that helped focus their minds and strengthen their confidence. Neither spoke much during these preparations.
Words were unnecessary between two people who trusted each other with their lives. That evening, Elena sat alone in the communications tent, once again staring at a blank piece of paper.
This time, she actually began to write,
her hand moving across the page in the careful script her grandmother had taught her years ago. "Dear Abuela," she wrote, "I wish I could tell you about this place, about the things I've seen and done. I wish I could explain how beautiful and terrible it is here, how the mountains look like cathedrals in the morning light and like tombs when the sun goes down. I think you would understand this place better than most people. You've seen what people are capable of, both the worst and the best." She paused, her pen hovering over the paper as she struggled to find words for feelings too complex to express. Finally, she continued, "I'm not the same person who left El Paso. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I know it's necessary. Tomorrow we have a mission that could save a lot of innocent lives. I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm proud to be your granddaughter, proud to carry the strength you gave me." Elena folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope, addressing it in the same careful script. She sealed the envelope and placed it in her footlocker, knowing it might be the last communication her family ever received from her. It was a morbid thought, but one that every soldier in a combat zone carried with them. The team departed at 2200 hours, loading into 2 armored Humvees for the first leg of their journey. The vehicles were stripped of unnecessary equipment and loaded with additional ammunition, medical supplies, and communication gear. Elena and Jake rode in the second vehicle, their weapons secured but easily accessible. The drive to the insertion point took 3 hours over roads that barely deserved the name. They navigated by infrared navigation systems and the expertise of their drivers, men who had made similar journeys dozens of times in the dark. Elena dozed fitfully, her body trained to take rest whenever possible, but her mind remained alert to every sound, every change in the vehicle's movement. At 0100 hours they reached the insertion point, a flat area where the road curved around a massive boulder formation. The vehicle stopped only long enough for the team to unload their equipment and check their gear one final time. Within minutes, the Humvees disappeared back down the mountain road, leaving 12 soldiers alone in the Afghan darkness. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the team leader, gathered everyone in a tight circle for a final briefing. Webb was a career soldier in his early 30s, a man who led by example and earned respect through competence rather than rank. Elena had worked with him on 2 previous missions and trusted his judgment completely. "From this point forward, we maintain radio silence unless absolutely necessary," Webb whispered, his voice barely audible above the mountain wind. "Elena and Jake, you break off here and establish overwatch. The rest of us will approach the target from the south. Remember, our primary objective is Amity, but we're not heroes. If things get too hot, we extract and try again another day." Elena and Jake shouldered their equipment and began the treacherous climb to their designated position. In daylight, the ascent would have been challenging. In darkness, wearing full combat gear and carrying precision weapons, it was exhausting. They climbed steadily for 2 hours, using night vision goggles to navigate the rocky terrain and natural handholds. Their destination was a cluster of large boulders on a ridge that overlooked the target compound from the northwest. The position had been selected based on satellite imagery and topographical analysis, but Elena knew that real terrain often differed significantly from maps and photographs. They were fortunate. The position was everything the planners had hoped for: concealed, stable, and offering excellent fields of fire. Elena and Jake spent an hour establishing their hide, using camouflage netting and natural materials to create a position that would be invisible from the valley below.
They arranged their equipment with practiced efficiency. Elena's rifle positioned for optimal shooting angles. Jake's spotting scope aligned to provide the best observation of the target area. Communication equipment tested and ready. By 0400 hours, they were in position and ready to begin their surveillance.
Through her scope, Elena could see the compound clearly despite the darkness. The buildings were arranged around a central courtyard, with what appeared to be guard positions at the corners. Infrared imaging revealed several heat signatures moving between the buildings, confirming that the location was occupied. "I count 6 guards visible," Jake whispered into his radio, reporting their initial observations to Lieutenant Webb and the approaching ground team. 2 at the main gate, 1 each at the corner positions, 2 rovers patrolling the perimeter. Elena tracked each guard through her scope, memorizing their patrol patterns and timing their movements. Professional soldiers developed routines, and those routines could be exploited by someone with patience and skill. She noted that the perimeter patrol took approximately 12 minutes to complete a full circuit, and that there was a gap in coverage near the northeast corner of the compound. "Ground team, this is Overwatch," Elena reported softly into her radio. "I recommend approach from the northeast. There's a blind spot in their patrol pattern that should give you about a 3-minute window." "Copy, Overwatch," came Lieutenant Webb's voice through her earpiece. "We're in position and beginning approach. Maintain surveillance and report any changes." The next hour passed with agonizing slowness. Elena and Jake watched the compound through their scopes, reporting guard movements and identifying potential threats.
The ground team's progress was marked by occasional whispered radio updates, but for the most part they moved in complete silence through the rocky terrain.
At 0530 hours, everything changed in an instant.
Elena was tracking one of the roving guards through her scope when she saw something that made her blood run cold. Through a window in what appeared to be the main building, she caught a glimpse of movement that didn't match the heat signatures they had been monitoring. There were more people in the compound than intelligence had suggested, many more.
"Jake," she whispered urgently, "switch to thermal imaging on the main building." Jake adjusted his spotting scope, switching to infrared mode to get a clearer picture of the heat signatures inside the structures. What he saw made him curse under his breath. The buildings were packed with people, far more than a simple operational headquarters would require. "Ground team, abort," Elena said into her radio, abandoning stealth for urgency.
I repeat, abort approach. The compound is heavily occupied. This is not a headquarters, it's a training camp. But it was too late. Even as Elena spoke into her radio, she saw muzzle flashes erupting from multiple positions around the compound. The night suddenly filled with the sharp crack of rifle fire and the deeper chatter of automatic weapons.
The Taliban fighters had been waiting, had known about the approaching American team, and prepared an ambush. "Contact! Contact!" Lieutenant Webb's voice crackled through the radio, nearly drowned out by the sound of gunfire.
"We're taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Request immediate support." Through her scope, Elena could see the chaos unfolding in the compound below. Dozens of Taliban fighters were emerging from concealed positions, their weapons aimed at the darkness where the American ground team was desperately seeking cover. It was a trap, perfectly executed and impossible to escape.
Elena didn't hesitate. Her training took over, pushing aside fear and emotion to focus on the immediate tactical situation.
She acquired her first target, a machine gunner who was pouring fire into the position where Lieutenant Webb's team was pinned down. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system.
The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through her scope she watched the machine gunner fall. But even before his body hit the ground, another fighter had taken his place.
Elena shifted to the next target, then the next. Her shots precise and deadly. But for every enemy she eliminated, two more seemed to take their place. "There's too many of them," Jake reported, his voice tight with stress as he called out targets and wind conditions. "The whole valley is lighting up. They've got us surrounded." Through her radio, Elena could hear the voices of the ground team, their calm professionalism gradually giving way to desperation, as their situation became increasingly hopeless. They were outnumbered at least 10-1, caught in open terrain with no cover and no escape route. "Overwatch, we need you to lay down suppressing fire so we can move." Lieutenant Webb's voice was strained but still controlled. "We're going to try to reach the extraction point." Elena continued firing, her targets carefully selected to create maximum disruption in the enemy's attack. But she could see that it wasn't enough. The Taliban fighters were too numerous, too well-positioned, and too prepared for this exact scenario. The American team was being systematically destroyed.
"Ground team, this is Overwatch," Elena said into her radio, her voice calm despite the horror unfolding below.
"Your position is untenable. I recommend immediate extraction." "Negative, Overwatch," came Webb's reply. "Extraction birds are 20 minutes out. We need to hold until they arrive." Elena knew they wouldn't last 20 minutes. She could see through her scope that several members of the ground team were already down, their heat signatures motionless on the rocky ground. The surviving soldiers were running low on ammunition and increasingly desperate. That's when Elena made the decision that would define the rest of her life. "Jake," she said quietly, her eyes still pressed to her scope as she continued to engage targets. "I need you to get on the radio and call for immediate extraction. Tell them we have multiple casualties and need priority evacuation." Jake was already reaching for the radio when Elena's next words stopped him cold.
"Tell them to extract everyone except me." Jake stared at her in shock, his hand frozen on the radio. "What are you talking about?" Elena shifted her position slightly, acquiring a new target through her scope. Her voice was utterly calm, as if she were discussing the weather rather than her own death. "Look at the tactical situation. The only reason those fighters haven't overrun the ground team completely is because I'm keeping their heads down. If I leave this position, Webb and the others die before the helicopters even get here." "Elena, no," Jake said, his voice breaking slightly. "We don't leave people behind. We'll find another way."
Elena took another shot, watching through her scope as another Taliban fighter fell. The volume of return fire immediately increased, bullets striking the rocks around their position. As the enemy tried to locate her muzzle flash, they would find her soon, she knew. It was inevitable. There is no other way, she said softly, still firing methodically at targets below. You know it, and I know it. Someone has to stay here and keep those fighters busy long enough for the extraction to happen. And someone has to go back and tell the story. Jake was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he continued to call out wind conditions and target information. He understood the tactical reality as well as Elena did. The position they occupied could support one sniper indefinitely, but moving two people with all their equipment would take too long and make too much noise. The Taliban fighters would locate them and eliminate them before they could reach safety. Through her earpiece, Elena could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Still many miles away, but approaching fast. She had maybe 10 minutes to create enough chaos and confusion to allow the ground team to reach the extraction point. She keyed her radio one more time, broadcasting on the frequency that would reach not just her immediate team, but the command structure back at the base. Her voice was steady, professional, tinged with a sadness that those who heard it would never forget. This is Sergeant Elena Rodriguez. Call sign Ghost. I am remaining in position to provide covering fire for extraction of ground team. Tell my mother I love her. Tell my grandmother that I kept my promise. I stayed true to who I am. Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio from the operations center back at base. Negative, Ghost. You extract with your team. That's an order. Elena smiled, expression of peace rather than happiness. Sorry, ma'am. Sometimes orders and duty don't align. Jake, you need to go now. Jake looked at her one more time, memorizing her face in the green glow of their night vision equipment. I'll tell them, he promised, his voice thick with grief. I'll tell them about tonight, about what you did. Don't make me a hero, Elena replied, still firing at targets below. Just tell them I did my job. Jake gathered his equipment and began the treacherous descent from their position, moving as quickly as stealth would allow. Elena watched him go through her peripheral vision while maintaining her focus on the compound below. She was alone now, truly alone, for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan. The sound of the helicopters was growing louder, and Elena could see through her scope that the ground team was beginning to move toward the extraction point. Several Taliban fighters had broken away from the main group to pursue them, but Elena's precision fire forced them back into cover. She was drawing more attention now. Without Jake to help spot targets and call out threats, she had to rely entirely on her own eyes and instincts. Bullets were striking closer to her position, sending rock fragments flying around her head. It wouldn't be long before the enemy fighters located her exact position and concentrated their fire. Elena pressed her lips to her radio microphone one final time, her voice carrying across the mountains to reach ears that would never forget the sound of it.
Save them without me.
The words hung in the air like a prayer, like a promise, like a goodbye that encompassed everything she couldn't say. Elena Rodriguez, the girl from El Paso who had dreamed of teaching children, had become exactly what the world needed her to be in that moment.
Not a killer, but a protector. Not a ghost, but an angel standing guard over those she loved.
The helicopters were very close now, their rotors beating the air into submission as they approached the extraction zone. Through her scope, Elena could see the ground team reaching the landing area, could see the first helicopter beginning its descent.
They were going to make it. Her sacrifice would not be in vain. Elena continued firing until her ammunition ran out, then switched to her sidearm, then to the grenades on her belt. When the Taliban fighters finally located her position and began their assault up the rocky slope, they found nothing but empty gear and spent shells. The ghost had vanished one final time, but her legend had just begun. The extraction helicopters lifted off from the Afghan mountains at 064, carrying 8 surviving members of the 12-person team that had embarked on the mission less than 6 hours earlier. Jake Thompson sat in the cargo bay of the lead helicopter, his eyes fixed on the receding landscape below, searching desperately for any sign of Elena Rodriguez. But the mountain ridge where she had made her final stand was already lost in the morning shadows, and Jake knew with terrible certainty that he would never see his partner alive again. Lieutenant Marcus Webb sat across from Jake, his left arm in a makeshift sling, his face bearing the haunted expression of a man who had watched good soldiers die under his command. The other survivors were equally subdued, each lost in their own thoughts about what had transpired in the valley below. They had accomplished their mission in a sense. The Taliban training camp had been disrupted, several high-value targets eliminated, but the cost had been devastating. Back at Forward Operating Base Chapman, Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood in the operations center, staring at the radio equipment that had fallen silent after Elena's final transmission. The words "save them without me" echoed in her mind, spoken in that calm, steady voice that had become so familiar over Elena's months of service.
Mitchell had been a soldier for over 20 years, had lost personnel under her command before, but something about Elena's sacrifice hit her differently. The colonel picked up a secure telephone, dialing a number she had hoped never to use. The conversation that followed was brief and professional, but beneath the military formality lay a deep well of grief. Elena Rodriguez had been officially declared missing in action, pending recovery of her remains and confirmation of her status. It was a designation that covered the harsh reality everyone already knew. The ghost was gone. The debriefing sessions began as soon as the surviving team members had been cleared by medical personnel. Jake found himself in a sterile conference room, facing a panel of officers and intelligence personnel who needed to understand exactly what had happened in the mountains. He told the story methodically, professionally, but his voice broke when he reached the moment when Elena had ordered him to leave without her. She knew, Jake said, his hands clasped tightly in front of him to keep them from shaking. She understood the tactical situation better than anyone. The ground team couldn't have reached the extraction point without her covering fire. She saved 8 lives by giving up her own. The questioning continued for hours, each officer seeking to understand different aspects of the mission. The intelligence officers wanted details about the enemy forces they had encountered. The tactical experts wanted to analyze the decision-making process that had led to Elena's sacrifice. The chaplain wanted to ensure that Jake was processing his grief in a healthy way, but Jake found it difficult to explain what couldn't be quantified or analyzed. How could he describe the way Elena had changed over their months of partnership, the gradual transformation from reluctant soldier to dedicated protector? How could he convey the peace in her voice during those final radio transmissions, the sense that she had finally found the purpose she had been searching for? The news of Elena's sacrifice spread quickly through the military community in Afghanistan. Soldiers who had never met her personally had heard stories of the ghost, the sniper who could hit impossible targets from incredible distances, who appeared and disappeared without trace, who protected other soldiers with deadly precision. But the reality of her final mission transformed those stories from professional admiration to something approaching reverence. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, a medic who had served alongside Elena during several convoy protection missions, sat in the base chapel 3 days after the failed mission, trying to make sense of her emotions. Elena had saved Maria's life during an ambush 6 months earlier, picking off insurgents who had targeted the medical vehicle with devastating accuracy. Now Maria found herself struggling to reconcile the quiet, professional woman she had known with the legend that was already beginning to form around Elena's memory. She never talked about herself, Maria confided to Chaplain Williams during one of their counseling sessions. We'd sit in the mess hall, and she'd ask about our families, our plans for when we got home, our dreams for the future, but she never shared her own. It was like she was more interested in everyone else's life than her own. The chaplain nodded thoughtfully. He had noticed the same thing about Elena during their few conversations. She had attended services occasionally, sitting quietly in the back of the chapel, but had never approached him for counseling or spiritual guidance. In hindsight, he wondered if her faith had been stronger than she had let on, if her sacrifice had been motivated by beliefs she kept private. Back in the United States, Elena's family received the official notification of her status on a Tuesday afternoon. The military notification team consisted of a colonel, a chaplain, and a family assistance officer, all trained to deliver devastating news with compassion and professionalism. But no amount of training could have prepared them for the reaction of Elena's grandmother. Rosa Martinez listened to the official notification with the stoic dignity of a woman who had survived revolution, immigration, and decades of hardship. She asked few questions, signed the necessary paperwork, and thanked the officers for their service, but after they left, she sat alone in her small apartment, holding the last letter Elena had written home, reading and rereading the words that suddenly seemed prophetic. Elena's mother, weakened by months of chemotherapy, but strengthened by fierce pride in her daughter, insisted on speaking to Jake Thompson via video conference from the base in Afghanistan. The conversation was arranged through official channels, but the emotions were deeply personal. "Tell me about my daughter's last days," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying across continents with perfect clarity. "Not the official report. Tell me about who she was." Jake found himself crying as he described Elena's dedication, her quiet professionalism, her evolution from reluctant soldier to protector of others. He told Elena's mother about their partnership, about the trust that had developed between them, about Elena's habit of memorizing the terrain around their base and her determination to understand every aspect of their missions. "She talked about you," Jake said finally, his voice thick with emotion.
About the stories your mother told her, about the strength she learned from watching you fight your illness. She said you taught her that courage wasn't about not being afraid.
It was about doing what needed to be done, even when you were terrified. Elena's mother smiled through her tears, recognizing her daughter in Jake's words. That sounds like my Elena.
Always more concerned about others than herself. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, with Jake sharing memories and anecdotes that painted a picture of Elena's final months. He described her dedication to improving her skills, her quiet mentorship of newer soldiers, her habit of studying intelligence reports long after her shift had ended. He told Elena's mother about the respect Elena had earned from her commanding officers and fellow soldiers, about the way she had become the unofficial guardian angel of their unit. As the weeks passed, Elena's story began to spread beyond the immediate military community.
War correspondents who had embedded with units in Afghanistan heard about the female sniper who had sacrificed herself to save her teammates. The story resonated with audiences back home, hungry for examples of heroism and sacrifice in a conflict that often seemed distant and abstract.
But those who had known Elena personally were uncomfortable with some aspects of the media coverage. The journalists wanted to create a narrative of female empowerment, of breaking barriers and challenging stereotypes.
They focused on Elena's gender, her small stature, her unlikely path from aspiring teacher to elite sniper. While these elements were certainly part of her story, those who had served with her knew they missed the essential truth of who Elena had been.
Jake found himself increasingly sought after for interviews, reporters eager to hear firsthand accounts of the Ghost's final mission. He struggled with how much to share, torn between honoring Elena's memory and protecting the privacy of her sacrifice.
Eventually, he developed a standard response that captured what he believed Elena would have wanted people to understand. Elena Rodriguez wasn't a hero because she was a woman in a male-dominated field, he would tell journalists.
She wasn't a hero because she could shoot better than most men or because she proved some kind of point about gender equality. She was a hero because when the moment came, when lives were on the line, she chose to save others instead of herself. That's not about being male or female. That's about being human.
The search and recovery efforts in the Afghan mountains continued for weeks, hampered by difficult terrain and ongoing security concerns. Elite special operations teams repeatedly returned to the area where Elena had made her final stand, but found only scattered equipment and evidence of the fierce battle that had taken place.
The Taliban forces had removed their own casualties and had likely disposed of Elena's remains to prevent them from becoming a symbol or rallying point for American forces. Colonel Mitchell made the difficult decision to officially declare Elena Rodriguez killed in action 3 months after the mission. The change in status allowed for proper military honors and provided closure for Elena's family, even without the recovery of her physical remains. But for those who had known her, Elena's absence remained a palpable presence, a reminder of the cost of the mission they were all part of. The memorial service at Forward Operating Base Chapman was attended by over 300 personnel, the largest gathering in the base's history. Soldiers, officers, support staff, and contractors came together to honor a woman who had embodied the best qualities of military service. The ceremony was simple but moving, featuring readings from Elena's letters home, testimonials from fellow soldiers, and a final roll call that ended with Elena's name being called 3 times without response. Jake spoke at the service, his voice steady but his eyes filled with unshed tears. He talked about Elena's evolution from uncertain recruit to confident professional, about her dedication to protecting others, about the partnership they had shared. But most importantly, he talked about the lesson Elena's sacrifice had taught him about the true meaning of service.
Elena taught me that being a soldier isn't about being the toughest or the strongest or the most fearless, he said, looking out at the assembled crowd. It's about being willing to put others before yourself, to accept responsibility for protecting those who can't protect themselves. Elena lived that principle every day, and she died living it. That's not just heroism.
That's what it means to be human. The impact of Elena's story extended far beyond the military community. Her sacrifice resonated with people who had never worn a uniform, who had never faced combat, but who understood the fundamental human capacity for selflessness. Schools began inviting veterans to speak about Elena's story as part of their curriculum on citizenship and service. Community organizations used her example to illustrate the importance of putting collective needs above individual desires. Elena's grandmother became an unexpected spokesperson for military families, speaking at veterans events and Gold Star family gatherings about the true cost of military service. Rosa Martinez, now in her 80s, found strength in sharing Elena's story with others who had lost loved ones in service to their country. My granddaughter didn't want to be a soldier, Rosa would tell audiences,
her voice carrying the weight of years but never wavering. She wanted to teach children, to help them learn and grow. But when her country needed her, when her fellow soldiers needed her, she became exactly what the situation required.
That's not just duty, that's love.
The military formally recognized Elena's sacrifice with a posthumous Silver Star, the third highest decoration for valor in combat. The citation read in part, Sergeant Rodriguez's extraordinary heroism, selfless service, and ultimate sacrifice in the face of overwhelming enemy forces exemplify the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army.
But for Jake Thompson, now serving his final months in Afghanistan before returning home, the formal recognition felt inadequate to capture the full scope of Elena's legacy. He had been present for her transformation from reluctant soldier to elite sniper, had witnessed her gradual understanding of her role as protector rather than killer, had heard the peace in her voice during those final radio transmissions.
In quiet moments between missions, Jake would find himself on the observation deck where Elena had spent so many hours studying the surrounding terrain.
He would look through a spotting scope at the same mountains and valleys she had memorized, trying to see the landscape through her eyes.
Sometimes he felt her presence there, a sense of watchful protection that he couldn't quite explain or dismiss. The other soldiers at the base had begun to report similar experiences. Sentries on night watch spoke of feeling an extra sense of security, as if someone unseen was watching over them. Patrol units operating in areas where Elena had provided overwatch reported an unusual absence of enemy activity, as if her legendary precision continued to deter attacks even after her death.
These reports were dismissed by officers as the natural psychological response to loss, the human tendency to find meaning and comfort in coincidence. But Jake wasn't so sure. He had spent months working alongside Elena, had witnessed her uncanny ability to sense danger and predict enemy movements. If anyone could continue protecting others even after death, it would be the ghost. Note to the trial for dumb dogs. Could we take pictures? As Jake's deployment neared its end, he struggled with the prospect of returning to civilian life without Elena. Their partnership had defined his understanding of military service, had taught him lessons about courage, sacrifice, and purpose that extended far beyond tactical procedures and marksmanship skills. How could he explain to people back home what he had learned from a woman who had given up her life to save others? The answer came to him during a conversation with Colonel Mitchell, who was also preparing to rotate back to the United States. They sat in the colonel's office discussing Jake's plans for returning home and his interest in potentially remaining in the military beyond his current enlistment. Elena's story doesn't end with her death, Colonel Mitchell observed, her weathered hands folded on her desk. The example she set, the lessons she taught, the people she inspired, that continues. Your job now is to carry that forward, to make sure her sacrifice continues to mean something, Jake nodded, understanding finally what Elena would have wanted from him. Not grief, not guilt, but action. She had taught him that being a protector meant more than just carrying a weapon or knowing how to shoot. It meant accepting responsibility for others, being willing to sacrifice for something greater than yourself, understanding that true strength came from service rather than dominance. When Jake finally boarded the transport aircraft that would carry him away from Afghanistan and back to the United States, he carried with him more than just his personal equipment and military records. He carried Elena's story, her example, her lesson about what it truly meant to serve others. He had been changed by their partnership, transformed from a young soldier seeking adventure into a man who understood the weight and privilege of protecting others. The transport aircraft lifted off from Bagram Airfield on a clear morning in September, 6 months after Elena's sacrifice in the mountains. Jake looked down at the receding landscape, at the valleys and peaks where he and Elena had worked together, where she had made her final stand. The mountains kept their secrets, but Jake knew that Elena's story would continue to inspire others long after the last American soldier had left Afghanistan. In the years that followed, Elena Rodriguez became more than just a war hero or a symbol of military sacrifice. She became an example of the fundamental human capacity for selflessness, a reminder that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things when called upon by circumstance and conscience. Her story was told in classrooms and barracks, in churches and community centers, wherever people gathered to discuss the meaning of service and sacrifice. Jake Thompson eventually left the military and became a teacher, fulfilling in some small way the dream that Elena had never been able to pursue. He taught high school history and civics, using Elena's story to illustrate lessons about citizenship, duty, and the cost of freedom. His students, most of whom had no direct connection to military service, found themselves deeply moved by the tale of the young woman who had given up her life to save others. The thing you have to understand, Jake would tell his students, is that Elena wasn't special because she was superhuman. She was special because she was completely human. She was afraid, she had doubts, she missed her family and wanted to go home. But when the moment came when people needed her, she chose to be the person the situation required. That choice is available to all of us, every day. Elena's grandmother lived to see her 91st birthday, spending her final years sharing her granddaughter's story with younger generations of military families. Rosa Martinez understood better than most that Elena's sacrifice was not unique in its tragedy, but in its visibility. Thousands of young men and women had given their lives in service to their country, most of them forgotten except by their families and fellow soldiers. But Elena's story had captured something universal about the human experience, about the tension between self-preservation and service to others. Her final words, "Save them without me," had become a rallying cry for those who understood that true leadership meant being willing to sacrifice for those under your protection. The ghost that Elena had become in life, invisible, deadly, protective, had evolved into something even more powerful in death. She had become a symbol of the best impulses of human nature, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances people are capable of extraordinary goodness. Her legend grew not because of what she had destroyed but because of what she had preserved. The lives of her teammates, the safety of innocent civilians, the ideals of service and sacrifice that define the military profession at its best. In the end, Elena Rodriguez achieved something that few soldiers ever do. She became immortal not through her capacity for violence but through her willingness to die so others might live. The girl from El Paso who had dreamed of teaching children had ultimately taught the world a lesson more valuable than anything found in textbooks or classrooms. She had shown that love, in its purest form, is the willingness to give up everything for someone else. The mountains of Afghanistan kept Elena's physical remains, but her spirit lived on in the hearts and minds of everyone who heard her story.
The ghost had finally found her peace, not in death, but in the knowledge that her sacrifice had meaning, that her example would continue to inspire others to choose service over self, protection over preservation, love over fear.
And in the quiet moments before dawn, when the world balanced between darkness and light, those who listened carefully could still hear her voice, carried on the mountain wind. They were not a cry of despair, but a command of love, a final gift from someone who had learned that the greatest victory was not in surviving, but in making sure others could.
She whispered, "Save them without me," the ghost sniper who faced the night alone.